There are very few people in the world who would be recognized in any corner of the globe. With me today is one such person.
My father always said, whatever happens in the future and whatever people will tell you in the future, Pelé is the best player in the world.
He pulled us to pieces. There's no doubt about that. We didn't get near him.
Knowing that I was going to come to Brazil for some time, the person I really wanted to meet the most here was Pelé.
And we felt we had a great chance of getting a result there, but after about 10 minutes of pure Pelé magic, I think we found ourselves 4 or 5 goals behind.
3-time winner in 1958, and he scored 2 as a teenager.
Wow.
I mean, in the World Cup final.
Can you imagine?
He is going to be a great inspiration, not only to the administrators of sport, but to our youth.
You just look at the World Cups, you see the old footies. Pelé's like God in football when you're growing up. You know, your parents talk about Pelé, your grandparents talk about Pelé. It's like something that doesn't exist really. It's like a mythical figure in football.
I used to go out and people said, Pelé, 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 all over the world. But no one remembers Edson. Edson is the person who has the feelings, who has the family, who works hard. And Pelé is the idol. Pelé doesn't die. Pelé will never die. Pelé is going to go on forever. But Edson is a normal person who was going to die one day. And people forget that. It's no secret that Pelé was and is an anomaly. Saying he was one of a kind is an understatement. Saying he did what nobody else could is an understatement. Saying he inspired multiple generations is also an understatement. And I'll be the first to admit that that may sound funny coming from a guy like me. Pelé played professional football between 1956 and 1977. I was born in the mid-90s. How on earth could this man have inspired me and my generation? Well, the same way that every icon does, through the power of story. My dad, like all of our dads and moms, spoke about this man in ways that exceed how we speak about Messi, Ronaldo, and all the others today. So this video isn't a typical how good video. We all have some idea of how good he was. If not, take a look at this picture. No, this video is rather a tale of tales. A few select stories that highlight exactly why the greatest of all time debate only exists the way it does today because this man came into the picture. With that being said, let's all indulge in a few tales of a legend. There are so many stories and examples that illustrate why Pelé means so much to football, how much of a legend he truly was, and how highly regarded he is across the globe. There was the time in 1997 when he was knighted by the British government for his services and accomplishments in football. It was an honorary award and he would only have been eligible to receive an actual knighthood had he obtained British citizenship. But still. Or how about the time that he transferred to the New York Cosmos in the North American Soccer League in 1975? His arrival had a sizable effect on the popularity of the sport in North America. It also sparked a sizable increase in overall attendance to Cosmos games by 1,300% in the 3 years that he played there. Apparently, the Cosmos routinely had to bring 25 extra Pelé shirts for each match, as every opponent always wanted to swap shirts with him. Now that is star power. There was the time in 1969 when Nigeria was in the midst of a brutal civil war. However, when Pelé and Santos traveled to Lagos for an exhibition match, a 48-hour ceasefire was agreed upon so all could watch the man work. Outside of that, there are mountains upon mountains of humanitarian endeavors and honors for such, like the time he auctioned off almost 2,000 pieces of personal memorabilia collected over his 2-decade-long career, raising £3.6 million for charitable organizations, or the very many ambassadorial positions he held at non-profit and charitable organizations following his playing career. The man was a legend in a lot of ways. So in the unlikely event that you needed an introduction, I mean, there you go. I think now we're all just about ready to go into more detail regarding what exactly made him a legend in the first place. In 1958, Brazil won their first ever World Cup. It was a truly momentous occasion that, if we're all being honest, was a long time coming. The 58 World Cup was the 6th edition of the competition. Brazil had been a part of every preceding edition but had yet to taste victory. By then, they had played in every stage of the competition and had notably snatched defeat from the jaws of victory in 1950. In Brazil. At the time, the tournament was structured as a series of group stages, with the team that wins the final group being crowned champions. All Brazil needed to do was draw in their final match against Uruguay to win the whole thing. Parades were taking place, 200,000 people were packed into the 78,000 capacity Maracana Stadium, still the most attended football match of all time, by the way. Medals had already been made, newspapers declared Brazil as winners. All of this happened before the match even took place. Brazil lost. There are several conflicting stories regarding what went down directly following the final whistle, but what is widely reported is that there were heart attacks and there were suicides, multiple in each case. A disappointing result that very much turned into a tragedy. It was a dreadful moment for Brazil. Edson Arantes do Nascimento was born on the 23rd of October 1940. Funnily enough, he was actually named after esteemed inventor Thomas Edison, which is quite apt, taking into consideration his unrivaled creativity. His nickname wasn't derived with as much intention though. After mispronouncing the name of a Vasco da Gama goalkeeper he admired by the name of Pelé, his friends mockingly called him Pelé. And as we all know, when your friends make fun of you for something, the more you resist, the more relentless they will be. Good to know this hasn't changed almost 100 years on. Pelé was born. When he entered his early teens, Pelé was already a national icon in the media. He signed with Santos at 15 and was labeled as a soon-to-be global superstar. He was to be protected at all costs. And you know what? I doubt whoever controlled Brazilian media back then had any idea of how right they were. The young attacker impressed every time he set foot on the pitch. Typically playing as an inside forward, he had the strength, he had the speed, he had the tricks, but most importantly, he had no fear. In an era where domestic football in Brazil was arguably the premier footballing level out there, Pelé was not only a starter for Santos at only 17, but he was the league's top scorer in Campeonato Paulista. 41 goals in 38 games. At only 5'7", he was out-jumping and out-muscling a lot of the opposition, and that was in addition to his elegance on the ball. The boy was something special, alright. The very next year, at his very first World Cup, he proved all the papers right. The boy scored 6 goals in the tournament, including a hat-trick in the semi-finals and a brace in the finals. Did I mention that he was fearless? Adding on to all of this, the historical context surrounding this wonder kid is quite something. As much as a lot of people shy away from the topic, race very much plays a part in all aspects of life. It always has and probably always will. So I'm pretty sure that everyone can only imagine what things must have been like in 1958. For added context, slavery had only been abolished as recently as 1888 in Brazil. They were amongst the very last nations to do away with it in the Western world. Pelé was the first black footballing superstar. You can only imagine the number of little boys he inspired purely based on the fact that he looked like them. He inspired everyone, for that matter. Of course, he wasn't the only one. Eusebio, Garrincha, and many more were doing great things, but this is a Pelé video. 4 years later, Brazil repeated the feat and won back-to-back World Cups. Despite being seen as the best player in the world by then, an ill-timed hamstring injury meant he would be sidelined after only 2 games. And then in 1966, Brazil were eliminated after failing to match the physicality and tactics of their opponents that time. Actually, saying the word tactics here is giving them far too much credit. Bulgaria and Portugal in particular set out to foul Pelé relentlessly and literally kick him out the game. It worked. As a result, the man announced that he was quitting the World Cup for good after essentially receiving no protection from FIFA and the referees, a decision which was quickly and thankfully, reversed. But things weren't going as well as they could have been the next time around though. By 1970, political unrest in Brazil led to President and military leader General Emílio Carrasco Médici heavily attempting to align himself with the national team to win over the people. There were a few issues though. The lead up for the 1970 edition was very much up and down. Brazil qualified, no problem, but off the pitch, there was a bit of a battle going on between Brazil's coach João Saldanha and the president of the country. Among other factors, team selections were at the heart of the issue. "I do not mess with his cabinet, he will not mess with my team." The words of Saldanha prior to being fired by the president. In his place came Mario Zagallo 2 months before the tournament. He was a winner of the cup twice as a player and also a former Brazil manager too, but the mood around the team wasn't as bright as it maybe should have been. Regardless, for the first time ever, in full color, the world watched on as Brazil came away with their third Jules Rimet trophy. And Pelé was, of course, the main man. Now 29, he'd been around for a while, and it showed. He ran proceedings in a deeper role and, unsurprisingly, was seen as the player of the tournament. 4 as in goals, 6 as in assists, but most significantly, 3 as in World Cups. No other player has repeated this feat. Pelé on the international stage is obviously the side of the man most well known to the world, but there was a whole other side to the guy that probably isn't mentioned as much as it should be. Pelé on the domestic scene. I already spoke earlier about the fact that he burst onto the scene and became the top scorer at Santos immediately. Well, here's the thing, that never stopped. He only got better and better. At the time, it must have seemed like there was no end to how prolific he could eventually become. And it shouldn't surprise anyone that hype around players in the transfer market hasn't changed all that much in the half-century since Pelé was active. The man was receiving so many transfer requests and lucrative offers from rich European teams that neither he nor Santos could keep up with them. Manchester United, Real Madrid, Juventus, Inter Milan, if they were a team of any significant status, you can almost guarantee that they made him an offer. Pelé himself admitted in an interview with 442 that Gianni Agnelli, chairman of Juventus at the time, had offered him his shares in Fiat if he were to sign for them, which in today's terms would have been a very hefty sum. Although I think it's safe to say that Pelé did incredibly well for himself and his family, so perhaps this didn't really matter all that much in the big picture. Anyway, for the sake of Santos, and for Brazil as a whole for that matter, something needed to be done. Pelé was larger than life. Consider how revered the man is today. Now, think about how important he was at the time. Definitely one of the most important figures in Brazilian culture. Sure. Nobody wanted to be the president or a national leader when this man was allowed to leave the country. And so, through a series of legal papers and rulings, Pelé was declared as a national treasure in 1961. The details of this ruling are admittedly a little hazy, but long story short, this legally binding declaration made it near impossible for Pelé to be transferred out of the country. And so, the question of the century could thus never be answered. What if Pelé played in Europe? Well, I guess we'll never know. But what we do know is that he is undoubtedly the greatest player in the history of Brazilian football and in the history of Santos. He won the Campeonato Brasileiro 6 times and was the top scorer 3 times. He won the Copa Libertadores twice, the Campeonato Paulista 10 times, where he was the top scorer 11 times. Over his entire career, he scored 1,279 goals in 1,363 games, including friendlies, of course. However, as many point out, the majority of these friendlies were apparently incredibly competitive. 643 of those goals were scored for Santos over 659 competitive matches, with 77 for Brazil over 92 matches. And just to add a tiny bit of food for thought for all of you, the Ballon d'Or was only available to European-born players up until 1995, and it was only available to players playing in Europe up until 2007, when it became a global award. Of course, Pelé was never eligible. However, a 2015 study by France Football looked into who would have won the award since its creation if it was always a global award. The study found that Pelé would have grabbed the award 7 times. 7. That is the same number of times that Lionel Messi has won it, by the way. Of course, the Ballon d'Or isn't a perfect metric for greatness, but can you just imagine how the landscape around the GOAT debate would be if the rules were just a tad different back then? Compelling stuff. 1st of October, 1977. After 21 years of glittering football, the career of Pelé came to a close with a testimonial match between Santos and New York Cosmos, the only clubs he ever played for. By the way, he also won the NASL soccer ball with Cosmos in 1977, and yes, it was called the soccer ball. At some point during the testimonial match, it began to rain, and as a result, the very next day, a Brazilian newspaper printed a headline claiming that even the sky was crying. Whoever came up with this tagline knew exactly what they were talking about. Love is more important than what we can take in life. Everything passes. Please, say with me 3 times. Love, love, love. Before the match began, these were the words that Pelé uttered to the almost 76,000 people in attendance. With the likes of Muhammad Ali, Bobby Moore, Mick Jagger, and Henry Kissinger in attendance, the gravitational pull that this man had was on full display. And just like that, he left the game. But like I've already said, his impact and ability to influence the world of football was far from over. During Pelé's playing days, he was widely regarded as the greatest of all time. End of discussion. A sentiment that still rings true for very many people to this very day. As a matter of fact, I feel like it's very common opinion that regardless of who's come in ever since, he's never really dropped out of the top 3. We can all argue that there have been better players, sure, especially when we consider how time, technology, and knowledge has advanced since the peak of Pelé's powers. Succession and the passing of the torch is only natural at the end of the day. However, what we can't argue is that there has been anybody that has come close to having the same impact, achieving the same feats, and being regarded in a similar fashion than Pelé. Simply put, forever and always, he is the king.
What's your ambition?
My ambition is to make people happy.
Well, you've done that all your life.
I tried.
So thank you very, very much.
My
Pelé.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Good luck. My pleasure.